around Lake Geneva without noticing that it was even there. On a visit to the Charterhouse of Dauphiné, St. Bernard astonished his hosts by arriving on a magnificent white horse diametrically opposed to the ascetic values he professed, but he explained that he had borrowed the animal from a wealthy uncle and had simply failed to register its appearance on a 4-day journey across France. Nevertheless, such determined efforts to scorn visual experience have always been matched by equally persistent attempts to mould the material world to graceful ends. People have strained their backs carving flowers into their roof beams, and their eyesight embroidering animals onto their tablecloths. They've given up weekends to hide unsightly cables behind ledges. They've thought carefully about appropriate kitchen work surfaces. We seem divided between an urge to override our senses and numb ourselves to our settings, and a contradictory impulse to acknowledge the extent to which our identities are indelibly connected to and will shift along with our locations. Belief in the significance of architecture is premised on the notion that we are, for better or for worse, different people in different places, and on the conviction that it's architecture's task to render vivid to us who we might ideally be. But sensitivity to architecture also has its more problematic aspects. If one room can alter how we feel, if our happiness can hang on the colour of the walls or the shape of a door, what will happen to us in most of the places we're forced to look at and inhabit? What will we experience in a house with prison-like windows, stained carpet tiles and plastic curtains? It's to prevent the possibility of permanent anguish that we can be led to shut our eyes to most of what's around us, for we're never far from damp stains and cracked ceilings, shattered cities and rusting dockyards. We can't remain sensitive indefinitely to environments which we don't have the means to alter for the good. There's no shortage of reasons to be suspicious of the ambition to create great architecture. Buildings rarely make palpable the efforts that their construction demands. They are coyly silent about the bankruptcies, the delays, the fear, and the dust that they impose. Even when we've attained our goals, our buildings have a grievous tendency to fall apart again with precipitate speed. It can be hard to walk into a freshly decorated house without feeling preemptively sad at the decay impatiently waiting to begin. In his essay On Transience, written in 1916, Sigmund Freud recalled a walk he took in the Dolomite Mountains with the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. It was an exquisite summer's day. The psychoanalyst was glad to be outdoors. It had been raining all week, but his companion walked with his head bowed and remained taciturn throughout the excursion. It wasn't that Rilke was oblivious to the beauty around him. He simply couldn't overlook how impermanent everything was. Freud was unsympathetic. For him, the capacity to love anything attractive, however fragile it might be, was a hallmark of psychological health. But Rilke's stance, though inconvenient, helpfully emphasizes how it can be those most enthralled to beauty who will be especially aware of and saddened by its ephemeral character. Such melancholic enthusiasts will see the moth-hole beneath the curtain swatch and the ruin beneath the plan. At its apex, a passion for architecture may turn us into aesthetes, eccentric figures who must watch over their houses with the vigilance of museum guards, patrolling their rooms in search of stains, a damp cloth or sponge in hand. Aesthetes force us to consider whether happiness may not sometimes turn on the presence or absence of a fingerprint, whether in certain situations beauty and ugliness may not lie only a few millimeters apart. We should thank these sensitive spirits for pointing us with theatrical honesty towards the possibility of a genuine antithesis between competing values, for example, an attachment to beautiful architecture and the pursuit of an exuberant and affectionate family life. How wise were the ancient philosophers in suggesting that we exclude from our vision of contentment anything that might one day be covered by lava or blow down in a hurricane, succumb to a chocolate smear, or absorb a wine stain. Architecture is perplexing, too, in how inconsistent is its capacity to generate the happiness on which its claim to our attention is founded. While an attractive building may on occasion flatter an ascending mood, there will be times when the most congenial of locations will be unable to dislodge our sadness or misanthropy. We can feel anxious and envious even though the floor we're standing on has been imported from a remote quarry and finely sculpted window frames have been painted a soothing grey. The noblest architecture can sometimes do less for us than a siesta or an aspirin. Those who've made architectural beauty their life's work know only too well how futile their efforts can prove. After an exhaustive study of the buildings of Venice, John Ruskin acknowledged that few Venetians in fact seemed elevated by their city, perhaps the most beautiful urban tapestry in the world. Endowed with a power that is as unreliable as it's often inexpressible, architecture will always compete poorly with utilitarian demands for humanity's resources. How hard it is to have to make a case for the cost of rebuilding a mean but serviceable street. How awkward to have to defend, in the face of more tangible needs, the benefits of realigning a crooked lamppost or replacing an ill-matched window frame. Beautiful architecture has none of the unambiguous advantages of a vaccine or a bowl of rice. Its construction will hence never be raised to a dominant political priority. Even if we could spend the rest of our lives in the Villa Rotonda or the glass house, we would still often be in a bad mood. Not only do beautiful houses falter as guarantors of happiness, they can also be accused of failing to improve the characters of those who live in them. Whatever the theoretical affinities between beauty and goodness, it's undeniable that in practice, farmhouses and lodges, mansions and riverside apartments have played host to innumerous tyrants and murderers, sadists and snobs, to characters with a chilling indifference to the disjunctures between the qualities manifested in their surroundings and in their lives. Architecture may well possess moral messages. It simply has no power to enforce them. It offers suggestions instead of making laws. We should be kind enough not to blame buildings for our own failure to honour the advice they can only ever subtly proffer. Suspicion of architecture may in the end be said to centre around the modesty of the claims that can realistically be made on its behalf. Reverence for beautiful buildings doesn't seem a high ambition on which to pin our hopes for happiness, at least when compared with the results we might associate with untying a scientific knot or falling in love, amassing a fortune or initiating revolution. To care deeply about a field that achieves so little and yet consumes so many of our resources forces us to admit to a disturbing, even degrading lack of aspiration. In its ineffectiveness, architecture shares in the bathos of gardening. It's forgivable to conclude that there must be grander causes to which human beings might devote themselves. However, after coming up against some of the sterner setbacks which bedevil emotional and political life, we may well arrive at a more charitable assessment of the significance of beauty, of islands of perfection in which we can find an echo of an ideal which we once hoped to lay a permanent claim to. Life may have to show itself to us in some of its authentically tragic colours before we can begin to grow properly visually responsive to its subtler offerings. It tends not to be young couples in love who stop to admire a weathered brick wall or the descent of a banister towards a hallway, a disregard for such circumscribed beauty being a corollary of an optimistic belief in the possibility of attaining a more visceral, definitive variety of happiness. We may need to have made an indelible mark on our lives, to have married the wrong person, pursued an unfulfilling career into middle age, or lost a loved one, before architecture can begin to have any perceptible impact on us. For when we speak of being moved by a building, we allude to a bittersweet feeling of contrast between the noble qualities written into a structure and the sadder, wider reality within which we know them to exist. It's in dialogue with pain that many beautiful things acquire their value.